Steins, Oracle Developer Advocate Team, as we're now called. We're not evangelists, as we originally said. There was too much God connotation with that, so we're going with advocates. So what I'm going to talk today is about a new feature of, well, say new, few years old now. It's addition-based redefinition. How many people have actually heard of it and kind of vaguely know what it's about? So a few of you. Okay, that's good. Well, this is a feature you can use to release changes to your database without any outage. And what I'm going to do is talk about the problem of deploying PL/SQL in particular to your database without additioning, some solutions you can use again without additioning, and then explain how you can use additioning, and it makes all those problems go away, hopefully. So when we get started, so as I say, I'm going to focus on deploying PL/SQL, so that's packages, procedures, also includes things like views and objects. There's a whole variety of things you can deploy into your database. Now, when you're actually releasing the code changes, there's a number of problems that can happen if you do so while people can access your database. So, if your application's live and you're deploying changes, there's a number of issues that can occur. One of these is that your database may be inconsistent for the duration of the actual release. Now, deploying packages is usually pretty quick, but you may get enough, particularly if you've got a lot of them, or to deploy, or there's various other changes, so you need to deploy a package, run some updates, deploy another package, and so on. A release may actually span over a number of time. And when I say by inconsistent, well, there's a few things that could happen. First up, when you make a change to a package, so procedure, package specification, and so on, you might invalidate other objects. Now, Oracle's got pretty good about preventing cascading invalidations. In the past, if you recompiled a procedure, you could invalidate your entire database, even though nothing was actually wrong. But you can still invalidate things currently. So if you change remove a parameter from a function, for example, anything that calls that function with the old parameter isn't going to work. And until you've deployed all the changes that are related to that, potentially anyone hitting your application will get an error, which is not very nice and not good. There's also a slightly more insidious problem. Say you've got a function which does return true at the moment, and your change is making it return false. You've probably got some code somewhere which depends on it returning true. As soon as you've deployed the change to make it become false, all your other code now probably doesn't work correctly. And depending on your application and how it's built, it might fail completely, which is probably the nice scenario here, because if it doesn't fail, it may well mean that users in some indeterminate weird state, which is going to cause some bug, later on, that someone's going to have to dig through the code and figure out how their order got messed up or something like that. So, if you're releasing these changes during the period of time you're actually making them, people could get either outright errors, or things could happen in an unexpected way, as in a way that the application designers don't want. So that's what I mean when we say it can be inconsistent. Another problem is if you've got a frequently executed piece of code, you can't get the DDL lock to actually recompile the package. Now, notice frequently executed doesn't necessarily mean you have a really busy database. I used to work at York Hospital, and out there we had a procedure which every time someone was booked into the radiology department, it sent a message to the radiographer's system, so you could actually get your images, pass your patient details on so they could take the x-rays. And we had about 15-30 seconds from the person being booked in to send it to this other system, so this package was always running. to do this process. And so for the whole time this is running, you can't deploy changes to it without stopping it. The other end of the scale is, I used to work for Flybe. The flight search results query was built by a PL SQL package from some dynamic SQL, and that, although each execution is only, a few hundred milliseconds normally, you've got so many people executing it that it's almost guaranteed that someone will be executing it at any given time. And I had the misfortune or carelessness to try and compile this package one morning at 3 AM when we had a release, and nearly brought the site down. Fortunately, it was 3 in the morning and no one really noticed. But these are some of the challenges that you can have if you try and keep your application running while you're just compiling a quick fix or something quite easy that you think you can get through easily. And the other challenge is, it's nice to double check that your release has actually worked. So there's a couple of things that could mean. First of all, making sure that everything's still valid after you've deployed your changes, or at least everything that was valid before you started the release is still now valid at the end. It can also be a good idea to actually do some black box testing through the application and make sure that the change does what you expect it to do. You did release the right version of the code. Nothing untoward has happened in the meantime. There's no crazy performance issues or bug you've hit which didn't turn up in testing. If you're releasing your changes while people are still using this application, you're doing this testing. Your users are doing this testing for you, and particularly if it's a public-facing website, the chances are Twitter will tell you you've got a problem before you know you've got it. So it's good to have a period of time to actually validate what you've released works, and go through a process there. So just out of interest, how many people actually are able to take an outage for their applications? Scheduled? No. Yes, some yes, some no. So, yeah, exactly. So, you can kind of avoid a lot of these issues by just taking an outage and agreeing with the business that Saturday night we're going to take the application offline for 4 hours or however long you feel you need to roll the changes out, validate them, and give time to roll back. Now that's all very nice, but what happens if you get an emergency rollback called? So yes, everything looked fine when you finished the release, but at 10 AM the next Monday morning, when your application is busiest, either a critical bug is found, some performance issue arises that wasn't discovered, or even the business has found that the change they release is causing a massive drop-off in conversion and they want it rolled back. At this point, you're already in an emergency situation. You don't really want to have to go and tell the wider business, it's alright, just wait 4 hours while we take the application offline, roll it all back, and make sure that everything's fine. So that's not a really good situation to be in. Another thing you might try is the concept of kind of rolling releases, where you have, particularly for public-facing websites, you have a load balancer, and you're steadily moving people from the old version of your application to the new version. Again, if you've deployed PL SQL, because there's only one version of that code, you can't do this. You can't have 2 people executing different versions of the code. Well, you can, but you have to get very clever with your development, and it's probably beyond a lot of people to do it correctly every single time. So we can see that there's a lot of problems if you want to actually deploy changes to your database while the application is still running. So I'm going to look at some of the ways you could get around this prior to 11G release 2. Now the first one is, this sounds really easy. You just rename all your packages. So every time you make a change, package 1, then it goes package version 2, package version 3, package version 4, and so on. And in principle, this sounds quite easy. You know, it's a little bit of extra work for your development team, but, you know, they've just got to update a version number. It can't be that hard, you know, can it? Surely. But it's not that straightforward. So, if we take a really simple view here, we've got 3 objects here. We've got a view, which is called by a package, which is in turn called by a procedure. Now, say you want to change the view, and you're only changing the where clause, so you're not changing the columns or the types of the columns. You're adding some new restrictions in, or something like that. Now, if you go with the renumbering your objects approach, you actually, so you have to rename the view, because you've changed that. But that also means you have to rename your package, because that now has to call the new version number of your view. And if you notice as well, you also have to rename your procedure, otherwise as soon as you've run your code, everyone can see the live version of the changes you've just released, if you want to avoid the issues I was talking earlier about, you know, having time to test and so on. So this one change to a view actually now means you've had to change all 3 things. You're shaking your head there like it's... Well, what if it's all in the same schema? But if the view and the package are in the same schema, you can't have a synonym to the old view because they're the same name.
Right, so if you version, you have a standard name, so you have package reference and view. View as a synonym to view 1 or V1.
But view V1 still exists.
Right, but the synonym never changes. As referenced by the package, but the view is pointing.
Okay, if you're in a multi-user environment, I can see how you could do that. But like say, okay, but it is getting a bit complicated doing things like that, and does obfuscate what's happening a bit. But even in that case, you've renamed it, but you still, as soon as you've deployed your change to the view, it's visible to everyone who's executing it. And like I say, if you want to avoid all the issues I introduced earlier, so then you have to do this. Now, most people they'll know they need to change the package because they've changed the view. But not everyone checks through thoroughly that they've got all their procedures renamed and done that. New developers on your team may not even be aware they need to follow this procedure, or a change may get rushed through and people get careless or just forget. So it's easy to overlook this. And of course, not only that, you quite easily end up in a spaghetti like this, where you've got lots of work. I've only got 3 or 4 actual different objects here, but they're all referencing each other, different versions, different numbers, and anyone coming to the system, you ask them what's the current live code. Is it version 5b up here, or is it version 2 down here? And unless you're always deploying everything in one go, it gets very confusing and challenging. And like I say, I've only got, I think it's actual 4 or 5 different things here. If you imagine you've got a schema with 30, 40, 50 or more views and packages, this can quickly get to be quite a mess. And I've lived this, it's not nice. And notice as well, I've talked about the dependencies for the code dependencies. There's also, as I mentioned, synonyms, but grants and privileges on the objects. These are things that, in my experience, get overlooked anyway for new objects, but they can be quite easily overlooked when you're deploying name changes like this. And it's the kind of thing that it's very frustrating to have to cancel a release or roll it back because you've simply forgotten to grant execute on the new package name. So that's not nice. So another solution you could take is some kind of active-active bidirectional replication of two databases. Does anyone actually do that? Does anyone have kind of, and I'm talking about two databases both running the live code. You've got, no, didn't think, yeah, you?
Three.
Three, oh yeah, okay, yes, yeah. And, you know, I put, you know, time and money. Not only are you going to have some extra hardware to support the basic running of the extra database, which probably means some extra Oracle licenses and any other, you know, OS licensing and so on. You also need some technology to actually help you with that. And, you know, you've got DataGuard, which has one direction replication. And even with active DataGuard, you can have a read-only version of your database, but you can't then deploy different versions of your PL/SQL onto different databases. So what I'm imagining here is if you have an active-active environment, you take one of them offline for the purposes of your release, deploy the changes there, bring it back online, take the other one off, and bring that online. Now, like I say, there's additional costs there in terms of hardware, licensing, technology. There's also a whole bunch of extra complexity. It's always challenging getting a representative test environment, and it can be even more challenging when you have some kind of crazy active-active solution like this. And it makes my head hurt thinking about this, so it's not something I want to think about. Another solution, which my boss, Stephen, will not be happy with, is not using database compiled PL/SQL. Now there's two things I could mean by that. One is no PL/SQL whatsoever, which of course means you lose the kind of performance benefits of using PL/SQL, or it could just mean using anonymous blocks written directly into your Java or C# or whatever it is code. In either case, because you no longer have the PL/SQL in the database, you've lost things like your dependency management, all your database views which tell you which things refer to what, so you've got less code reuse. Also, if you have PL/SQL which would benefit from this, from native compilation, you can't do that with an anonymous block, and like I say, there's no dependency management, and like, Stephen would not be happy if I was advocating that you didn't use PL/SQL. So, is everyone kind of understanding where we are now? Any kind of, yeah? So, to make Stephen happy, well, I don't think it was to make Stephen happy really, Oracle introduced edition-based redefinition. And this actually allows us to deploy multiple versions of the same PL/SQL object into one database. And this doesn't involve any kind of renaming of objects or any other shenanigans I discussed earlier. So what happens is, when you have EBR, you have multiple editions in your database, as they're called. So here we've got 3 editions, and not as clear as I'd hoped on here, but see on the left, edition 1 is our original one with all the code on release 1 of our application. And we're going to go through the same process where we're making a change just to the view in release 2. So we create edition 2, and in this, we've only changed the view. So I've grayed out, we've got the little dashed out boxes to show that although we haven't actually changed them in edition 2, we've inherited the code that runs. So that means they exist in this edition unchanged from the previous one. And again, if we then go on to edition 3 uses all the code from the previous edition, or even further back to edition 1 if there was no changes. So our package across the middle here. And we can then just change the objects that we're actually making a change to. Now this saves us from all that kind of renaming hassle where we need to change the name of each thing and worry about what's calling what and make sure we're updating all the dependencies correctly. And so I'll just talk through the steps of how you actually get Edition EBR up and running. So how do I use it? There we go. So the first step you need to take is to Edition enable your database. And that means you need to enable the users with this alter user command. Now this is a really key point. You cannot roll this command back. There is no alter user disable editions or roll back or revert. If you do this and change your mind, you have to drop your user and recreate it if it's got no data, or restore it from backup. I'm going to come back to this a bit later because there might be some headaches that this causes for you. So once you've actually enabled the users that you want to use EBR for, you can then create editions and then grant the users privilege on the editions to actually access them. So we had the 3 editions before. We create edition 1, and then I've got my user A, and I grant my user A the ability to use it. No other schemas in the database at that point, other than sys and system, actually have the ability to use that edition at that point. So this means it's a private area you can actually use to deploy your changes. So if you change a package, no one else can see that except the users who have that access to that edition. You can even drop objects within an edition and it won't be visible to users in the old edition. And to actually access the edition, you alter the session. Now, when you connect to the database, all databases have a default edition. And if you do nothing and don't make any changes to specify your edition, you will connect to that. Now you can use this alter session command to change within your session which edition you're connected to. So any session you've got use privileges on, you can modify and access that. So you alter your session, compile your code, make your checks, and you're away. Now the next thing you probably want to do is actually run your application through the new edition before, again, exposing it to the greater world, your business users, whoever it is. And there's a number of ways you can do that. So you can set some information in your connection string. So there's an OR edition environment variable. So if you're using SQL+, you can set that in Windows and Unix. Another very useful thing is this JDBC edition name property. This is something we used extensively at 5e. They had a way to inject via property files into their application, so we could deploy the new version of the application into some VMs which weren't exposed to the public, release the edition into the database, and we could do some testing in private, and they could connect through that. And then when we were happy everything was working, we can change that edition name property, and the new connections will then use that edition. Another approach, how many people here use database services for connecting? A handful, yeah. So there's a DBMS package you can also use, so you can specify which edition a service uses. So again, you might have a particular service that you use just for releases, so you can test and do what you want on that, or depending on how your application's set up, you might have two services, like an A and a B, so you can release to A and go over to B and flip back and forth and things like that. So there's a number of approaches you can use, so you don't have to execute alter sessions in your code all over the place to change the addition. Yes, so, yes. Now, getting lost. So, that seemed relatively easy. Is anyone disagreeing at this point, or is that cool? There is quite a big catch, which I kind of alluded to when I mentioned about not being able to roll back additioning enabling your users. How many people here have public synonyms in their database? Yeah, quite a few of you. They'll be the first casualty of EBR. So, not all objects are additionable. Now, it's best to look in the docs and just double check exactly, but primarily PL SQL objects are additionable, so packages, views, functions, object types, things like that. Everything else is not additionable, so you can't addition tables, you can't addition indexes. You can addition private synonyms, but you can't addition public synonyms. If you think about it, your public synonym is always visible to everyone, and if you have to have multiple additions of that, which, what does that actually resolve to for people who are addition enabled and for people who aren't? Other things you might have materialized views which reference packages. Does anyone here use virtual columns? Yeah. Do they call PL SQL, or is it? Yeah. Again, there'll be another casualty. So if you've got these, you're going to have to rethink your application. Unfortunately, like public synonyms, fairly easy to resolve. You can just create private synonyms for everything. But if you've got virtual columns, which depend on PL SQL, which is not going to be easily extracted, straight into the virtual column, you're going to have to rethink. You might have to create a view instead of using the virtual column or something like that.
But you would thought that you just use the owner of the materialized view to resolve which additions would be important.
Well, because it stores the results, then you've got two versions of your package which potentially return different results. And it's actually the kind of executed code which is addition. The actual base data is not addition. You don't have two copies of all your data flying around, because that, again, makes my head hurt thinking about how they would actually manage that. Not only from making it work, but you'd easily double the size of your database. How would you addition a billion row table that's 6 gigs in size?
So a normal materialized view without a virtual column, that's really good.
No, so these are non-additionable objects.
Okay,
No, it's only a problem if they refer to additionable objects.
Right.
So basically, packages, views, things like that. If it just uses straight SQL, then you can get away with it. But the thing is, when you first try and additions enable your user, you'll get an error telling you that you've got non-addition dependencies, and you're going to have to, like say, the exact solution will depend on your environment. You may also get this if you've got cross dependencies. So if you've got two users, user A refers to user B's package and user B refers to user A's packages. When the first one you addition enable will fail because it's now referring to non-additioned objects in the other schema. There is a force command to kind of get you around that, and it will invalidate all the other users' objects that refer back to the first schema.
Isn't that changed in 12.6? 12.6 supports non-additioned objects in conjunction with additionable objects.
Okay.
It rings a bell. I could be totally wrong.
I think my understanding is that you can do it, you just have to force it initially.
Oh, okay.
But I'd have to check that. So, like I say, depending on how much PL SQL you use and how complicated your environment, this is either going to be a piece of cake or it's going to be an utter nightmare. And unfortunately, only you can answer that situation. So, now another thing to be aware of is that you're building up these editions. So all databases come with a default, which is or a $base, and then you release one, you've got release 1, edition 1, release 2, edition 2, release 3, edition 3, and you keep going up, building up more and more editions in your database. As you get more of these, it's more likely that someone will do something silly and connect to the wrong edition. You know, I know this is also a bit of a leap that your development teams will also have to make. Hopefully you're replicating this in your development environment, so you've also got additions there, so you have a similar live to at least QA environment. And I know from experience there isn't much visibility of the additions information in the current tools. So for example, in SQL Developer, there isn't a little flag or widget or something somewhere which says I am connected to edition 1 or I am connected to edition 2. There is a handy select statement which I keep going to Tim's website to find, which tells you the edition of your current session, but usually by the time you've remembered to do that, you've already incorrectly done something which is destroyed, or, well, hopefully you haven't done it in production. Hopefully, as with some of my colleagues, they've just lost half a day in development wondering why their code wouldn't work before realizing they were just connected to the incorrect edition. And this, again, this is a shift, a bit of a mindset shift you'll have to take. It is easier, in my opinion, than managing that multiple package renumbering system, but it's not straightforward. Now, there's a few steps you can take to kind of mitigate this. As I said before, all databases have one default edition. Once you've deployed your code into release 1, tested it, made sure it will work, and actually made the application live, you can then make edition 1 the default edition for your database. And that means everyone who connects will come into edition 1. This is nice if you've got a nice simple database with one application that just uses editions and it's always on that one. But how many people have multiple applications connecting to their database? Yeah, a few of you. You can imagine that actually they might end up on different editions because they've got different release schedules and so on. Well, so you've got application 1 which is deployed to version 1, and you put that into edition 1, but you're not making any changes to application 2, so you just leave it on the current edition, and then you come to make the change, and are you deploying that into edition 1, or are you making another new edition 2? So it can get a bit messy if you have lots of applications connecting. Another step to kind of protect yourself a bit, just like you can grant use on editions, you can revoke use of editions. So once you're sure a particular schema is done and dusted, so you've upgraded my user up to edition 1, so this is the first one, you're getting rid of Oracle base, you can revoke access to it. This reduces the chance that someone will accidentally, connect in and alter session, or have some old connection setting kicking around. They've set that environment variable in their properties file and forgot about it, or something equally daft. So you can revoke access, which will help mitigate this. You can drop editions as well, but you can only drop editions at the top and the bottom. You can't drop an edition in the middle. And to drop an edition at the top, so your parent, you start and you go all the way down, you actually have to have made copies of your code in all the subsequent, in the next parent edition, which you have to basically recompile everything in that, the next edition down before you can drop it off. It's not something I've personally done, mostly because I was a bit worried about, whether it would work. There's not much literature around about how this works in practice. Partly I think because not many people are using additioning. And again, I put here good governance. I think it's, if you do take this approach, I really recommend that, part of your release form or QA or whatever it is, you have a nice big red writing, deploy into edition 1, and, as part of your release scripts, the first thing it does is alter session, set edition, whatever your target edition is. Because this helps reduce the chance of mistakes. And it's also, if possible, I would recommend that you assign one person to actually kind of own the editions for a given database. I know that's not always feasible in practice, but it does prevent which is the live edition for that database? Is it 2 or 3, or is it, if you really take this to heart and end up with 10, 20 editions, you could see that unless someone's got good control on what the live ones are now, you could end up in some kind of slightly crazy mess again. So that was edition-based redefinition. Hopefully, we saw, some of the challenges around deploying code without using it, and that the solutions, other than using editioning, are challenging and messy, potentially expensive. Now, EBR does bring its own challenges. It does have, particularly if you do have this non-additions to additionable dependencies issue. But, I found it worked very well. Like I say, we used it, my previous role was at Flybe. We used this to manage the additioning for our packages. We only had a few key ones to support Flybe.com, but the ability to deploy changes to those while the application was still running, validate that they worked, and roll back if necessary without actually exposing real users is really useful, because it means if you're just deploying PL SQL changes, potentially even you could do them in the day without having to schedule a big outage or an overnight release. Now there is a lot more to EBR. You can also use it to manage schema changes through editioning views. Now that does get complicated, and it's basically a talk in its own right. So I'm not going to talk too much about it there now. There's a bunch of my references for this. So we can use it to deploy with 0 downtime. It's easier than some kind of active-active replication. It has a lot of the similar challenges to package renaming with knowing what the current live one is, but it's less messy, and there are ways you can mitigate it, which you can't do quite as effectively if you're just renumbering your packages. And finally, it does require 11G release 2 plus. How many people are at least that high? Okay, good number. That's good. Any questions?
Just a question on the demo switch. So say I'm a user connected on edition 1, and you've got edition 2 just sat there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
How do I'm already connected. How does that then flip to
yeah. So that's a good question. So anyone who's connected to an edition, all the sessions won't be changed. Basically, you have to disconnect and reconnect them. So if you've got an application with an application pool, you'll need to, recycle them or something like that. Again, in my experience, typically database releases were also coupled with an application release anyway, which, would reinitialize connection pools. That may or may not be your situation, but or at least if there is a way, I don't know how to do it. But yeah, you do need to force that. Any other?
Yeah, how does it work with downstream databases? If you've got something like data guard, active or streams,
Yeah. So if you
it's feeding to the primary.
in terms, so if you've got data guard, then the additions will be propagated to the standby. For streams and Golden Gate, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look. My instinct says probably not, but I'd have to look into that. But I mean, again, remember you're not additioning your data; you're just additioning your code here. So, you know, if you're using something like Golden Gate, are you actually propagating your PL SQL as well through that, or? I don't even, can you even, does anyone know? Can you do that? Use Golden Gate to propagate your packages to other databases.
Yeah, I'm not sure. These streams lock again replicate data, not.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure whether it can do it or not.
Yeah.
The DDL percentage of the it's change DDL to screen so you can be adding indexes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. Well then.
Golden Gate's supposed to be taken over from Stream, so
Yeah.
you expect me to do it. Is there any licenses?
No, it's is it? It's included in. I'm not sure if it's in standard edition. It's definitely part of enterprise. For actually, I need to check on standards, but it's definitely part of enterprise edition. No extra additional cost. I'm doing the right time. Or? Yeah. Cool. Anyone else wants to know? Or?
How many customers actually using this? Because I have. Your mention of Flybee using it, I'm not aware of anybody.
So yeah, uptake hasn't been as great.
What I heard was that it was originally brought in because the business suite didn't want it. So if using the business suite, some of your patches actually get done using this now. So it has got some legs on it, even if it's only old. But my own feeling for it is there are often some bits of the application where this is really vital, and some bits where you kind of don't even want it. And so it may be that you're using it to focus on one or two packages that are key for you, whereas all the reference stuff can come and go without really much of a problem. It's still part of the addition, but you probably won't even ever go do anything other than have the initial inherited value package. So,
I think that's a great point, Tim, actually, because like I say, at Flybee we used it, and there was a few key packages which drove Flybee.com we used it for. There's a whole bunch of backend apps which we could take down for half a day if we really needed to. So, you know, you may well be that you just target on the things that you truly need 100% or as good as 100% uptime on.
I actually discussed this with one of the team that were involved in it, and sort of said, "Am I a numpty for doing this? You know, have I lost the plot on it?" And they went out on it. So I don't think it has to be all encompassing. If you've got some key areas, especially with the addition views as well, because you can hide, Chris mentioned, you hide schema changes, then you might have a few key areas. Once again, reference tables just don't change, do they? You add more, but you don't change old ones that often. But you have a few key tables in every system where a change is disastrous, and in addition, you can hide that change to allow you to move forward. So, you know, it's worth looking at, but don't assume you're going to have an additional view in front of every single table you ever define, because I don't think that's really practical. There's too many working parts. What about triggers?
What about triggers? Yeah, they are additionable. So you can have two different versions of a trigger in your database.
And you will probably use cross-addition triggers as well. So triggers that maintain the data. So you add a new column, you hide it from an old edition using the addition view, and you need to make sure it's populated. So use a cross-addition trigger to populate it, so that you don't switch across the new edition and have an empty column. So you can make pseudo-mandatory columns that are actually options in reality.
Yeah. And one thing I just remembered, be wary of things like jobs and other background processes, because it's very easy to overlook the fact that they will still be on the old edition when you after you've deployed your code. And I've been burnt by this. Deployed it into the most recent edition, job done, we're going, and then the job's still running on the old code because we haven't up at the old edition, because the default edition of the database hasn't been upgraded to the new release. And suddenly that, you put all this release in, and this little tiny thing over here you just managed to forget about. It causes you, a nightmare.
Releases you reckon are PL SQL family, as opposed to PL SQL and some form of database or some other, very often is implying application changes outside of that phase. And releases generally aren't just a bit of PL SQL.
Very true. Now, again, it's a question of, Tim's kind of alluded to cross-edition triggers where you can maintain data across schema changes. Now this might just be me. In my experience, typically we only made non-breaking schema changes, which means adding new tables, adding new columns with either defaults that were acceptable to the old application or nullable. So although we've added new stuff, it kind of didn't really matter that they were there because nothing referenced them. And again, when we were talking about the kind of rollback scenario, that was the key driver for that. If you've made a schema change which requires you to do some kind of data update and manage it, and that's what the cross-edition triggers stuff manages. And like I say, that that's where editioning does get complicated. And I personally haven't tried it, and I don't know anyone who has. So, although I know it has happened, but I.
It's awesome on the laptop.
Yeah. Well, so Bryn Llewellyn, who's product manager for this, so that's part of the reason why this was actually introduced, was to enable schema changes to be done online. Now, I have actually used this to hide a schema change. We had a table that basically we wanted to split into two, and obviously to save us having to recode the whole application, so it was joining the two together, we built a view over the top that was, instead of insert, split data into the two new tables. Now, because private synonyms are additionable, we deployed the view into the new edition, updated the synonyms point to the view, and when it talks through that new edition, actually, you just hidden a schema change from your data, from your entire application. I've only done that once, but it did actually work quite well for that. End up saving basically a 2-month rewrite of the application, or refactoring to support the change.
So how do you receive that? You have to say private request procedure, edition.
No.
It just creates new ones every time you recompile.
So, as far as your developers are concerned, in some respects, they could almost not know it even exists. You just write your procedures as normal. And then what happens is you connect to your database. If you've got two editions, edition 1 and edition 2. Well, let's start. You've got Orabase, which you've got all your initial version of your code deployed in. You then create edition 1, and that inherits all the code you've got in Orabase. Any code you compile in that is then only visible in edition 1 and downstream editions. So whatever it used to be in Orabase, it just doesn't matter. You could completely change it.
You just now know anything you want.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, then you could change it. You could change all the parameters. You could change the entire body. It's just the name that actually kind of carries across. And the key thing is you carry across all the dependencies and the references, so all your grants, all the things that talk to it still talk to it as if it was the old object. So if you have done something crazy and bonkers, then, you know, it's, yeah. Anything else? Because if no one's got anything else, there's something, I'd like to do something a bit different quickly. So. No, I don't dance. It's a SQL magic trick. So I just need to wait a couple of minutes for my VM to boot up. But I will need a volunteer for this. Well, this is going to take a couple of minutes to boot up, so... before I move on, has anyone got anything else they want to ask about BBR? How do people feel about it? Do they think it's useful? Kind of not useful?
You probably find people that need it when you're using version in a package change, and then they change from that on the brownfield site to this, which is more difficult, which is why probably people haven't taken it up. Whereas if you're starting a brand new project and you want to make one of it, if you've already got the whole system in place, change version name all your packages to this.
Yeah.
It's probably more acceptable.
Yeah.
Most of the benefits of the margin
Yeah.
I don't know though, I mean, it's like anything, it's not until you start playing with it you realise the value in it, and I suppose probably the biggest barrier, well, or not, yes, agree. Biggest barrier at the moment is there's still a lot of people not on 11 and GR2, which you ain't been using.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I say, at Flybe, we were in that situation where we were renumbering all the packages, and it kind of worked, but we had been caught out by some releases where, you know, particularly if you've got two developers concurrently working on the same package, which version number do you take? Because the first one will take the next number, and the next one will take the next number, but inevitably projects don't get released in the same order that they're developed. So, do then everyone have to refactor their code and renumber to be in the correct order, or do you know, that's kind of what I was alluding to with that A, B, C stuff. You know, you end up potentially in a bit of a mess. Now, like I say, there is some investment up front, and it will depend on your environment. We found it really useful. And I'm an Oracle employee now, so I have to tell you how great it is, and it will change your life. So,
you mentioned earlier when you were trying to enable it, but it gives you a warning telling you can't because you've got an additional object.
Yeah.
Well, I've got additioning running, and I create something additional. Will it tell me?
Yeah, so, hang on, say that again, sorry?
You said, when you do the one-way, let's have addition, please.
Yeah.
Onto user, give you a warning if there's stuff that it can't handle, like.
Yeah.
So if I set additioning up, I'm doing great. Some idiot doesn't understand additioning and the problems with it, and they go and create something like a virtual column based on a prop. Will I get an error? Try and create that virtual column on a prop.
I don't know, to be honest. I need to check that.
Just for the, you know what I mean?
Yeah, once you've already got additioning set up and then you're trying to create things, I don't know. I'd have to check.
That's cool.
So what I'm gonna, just to finish up, I'm gonna do a little SQL card trick. I've got a deck of cards here. You can see it's got all the various ones, and like I say, can I have a volunteer, please? Come on. Go on, man. Up you come. Alright then. So what I want you to do is, so what's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel. Okay, so we've put Daniel. What I want you to do is pick a value and a suit. So basically 2, 3, 4, 5, and then clubs. So pick one of those. Don't tell me. Paste it into there. Paste it into there, and then yeah. So I got the screen over there. So put it in there and run the update. Okay. So what I want to do is actually transfer the value of the card, and I'm going to run a statement here which will return your card.
Yeah.
Okay, so just kind of come here, look at me.
Right.
Okay, keep looking at me. Okay, so I need to think about the card. I want you to think about the value and what it was you typed in.
Yeah.
Okay, you thinking about that? Okay. Alright, I think I've got it now. So if I run this now, was that your card?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And hopefully, it's not working. No. Okay. That was just a nice little trick for you to
Penn and teller and tell us how you do it.
Oh no, catch me at the end if you're interested, and I'll. Okay then. Well, that's me. I guess we're right. Thank you.